Welcome to the Ernie Chambers Show.
Brothers and sisters, friends, enemies, and neutrals. As Fats Domino says in part, yes, it's me and I'm here again. I'm going to do something I ordinarily don't. I'm going to do mainly reading. I'll tell you why. I don't believe things change much in this country on the racial front. They passed in Congress just the other day a law that makes lynching a hate crime. Why would it take so long? Why should it even be necessary? The concept of lynching is something that should be a relic of the past, but they finally got it done. It's attributed to the French, the notion that the more things change, the more they remain the same. America is not going to change when it comes to racism in the same way that a leopard is not going to change its spots. So I'm going to deal with something I was involved in more than a half century ago. And I think it is as relevant or timely in 2022 as it was in 1968. So I'm going to get started. This relates to my appearance before the Kerner Commission. It was also known as the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, or simply the Riot Commission. This article comes from July 29th, 1968. It was sent to me by somebody after they became aware of things that I had said during my appearance. There were only 4 people in the whole country who were invited to address that commission behind closed doors. I was one of the 4. And at the time, I was 30 years old. Long ago. This is what Kerner said. His name is Otto Kerner. At that time, he was the governor of Illinois, and he was also the chairperson. He was giving a comment after the sessions had occurred. He was on a Mississippi paddle wheeler participating in a bi-state goodwill conference in the Quad City area when the president's call came. It was 8:30 p.m., July 28th, probably 1967. The president called. This is Kerner talking. Would I serve as chairman of the commission? The president wanted to know right away, and of course I said yes. With the help of a skilled staff directed by David Ginsburg, we put in many hours of work. We walked in the riot-wrecked ghettos to see for ourselves. We heard scenes of witnesses ranging from far right-wingers to Black radicals like Stokely Carmichael. Much of that testimony must remain confidential for the time being, for it was given only with that assurance. We wanted everyone to be heard, left, right, center. I didn't say what I offered had to be kept confidential. I wanted as many people as possible to hear it. I don't speak behind my hand. I say what I say. I take ownership of what I say. Continuing. We immersed ourselves in America's racial agony. Its bigotry, the system of segregation, the fears and fury of the ghetto. Backing away from labeling racism is intellectually dishonest, said Kerner. And that's what's happening now with this so-called anti-CRT. They do not want to label racism what it is, and that is not only intellectually, but it is morally and ethically dishonest. And they know that that's what it is, but they're playing politics strictly. Continuing. In November and December of 1967, we began to crystallize our thinking on the causes of Black rioting. That weekend meeting in Washington clinched it in our minds. I think a number of us strained with the idea that the cause of civil disorders is poverty, or they started with that notion. It is not poverty. Actually, there are more whites than blacks in poverty areas. Nor essentially are agitators to blame, although there are agitators. What about unemployment and underemployment, bad housing, inadequate education? They play a significant part, but there was something behind it all. Maintaining and enforcing the system of two societies separate and unequal. And that something is racism. That's their conclusion. And it's the conclusion of anybody who's looked at American history and lives in this country. Continuing. Some of our members found it difficult, of course. There's no point in singling anyone out, but we all learned a good deal as we went along. And this is what they said about me. Our Black nationalist witness, for example, was so blunt and spoke with such frightening logic that some of our members left that room white as a sheet. Some of us said things at the start of our work that we no longer could accept. At the end, what they said at the start, they couldn't say at the end. It was not the two Negro members of the commission, Roy Wilkins and Senator Brooke, who led us to confront racism. No, it was the white members. The Negroes doubtless saw it all along, although they did not state it as bluntly as we decided to do. Racism is many things, of course. Take a young man raised in a Negro ghetto. We call him a rioter, but how many of us know that by age 21, he will probably have been arrested 5 or 6 times for no special reason? People of the ghetto simply are arrested frequently on suspicion. This is the conclusion of these people after they studied it, and we know it to be the case, and it happened to me. Not just on suspicion, but out of vindictiveness. When this young man applies for a job and his arrest record comes out, that's it. The personnel director probably never even tries to find out why the young man was arrested or if he ever was convicted of anything, as he might if a white lad were involved in the same situation, and that is racism. We grow up with these unconscious and perhaps unintentional prejudices, and the anti-CRTers don't want to acknowledge that. They say it doesn't exist. Continuing, but to a Negro family man, racism means that his income is about 40% that of a white man of comparable education and skills. His chance of being out of work is at least twice as high. He pays more for worse housing. His schools are poor. His life expectancy is lower. He is at the bottom, unemployed or underemployed. That is why our report had to be so disturbing. The remarkable thing about it was that it was unanimous. We had some trouble nonetheless, because some of our staff people thought we were going to be softening it. And here I emphasize that it was the commission's report, not the staff's. I think some staff members were disappointed because we and not they were running the commission. Actually, we went over every word and often made them more emphatic. Some chapters were rewritten 4 or 5 times. There was chapter 5 on the history of 300 years of racial prejudice in America, written for us by a foremost historian, the chairman of the history department of one of our great universities. And this is the very kind of thing that those people who are against what they call critical race theory, they don't want those things taught. But critical race theory deals with something entirely different from what they're talking about. Critical race theory is not in the grade schools, not in the high schools, sometimes not even in certain universities. It's maybe a graduate from university, area of discussion. Continuing. This scholar entitled the chapter Alienation and Protest. We changed that first word to rejection. That's a strong word, he told me. This is my response to him. But don't you have to be part of something before you can be alienated from it? I asked him. He agreed. Rejection was a more factual and descriptive word. Well-intentioned white people always want to soft pedal the situation. It is a matter of this country having rejected Black people and continuing to do so. But as I said, I'm going to spend most of my time reading. That was sent to me without giving me the name of the paper and without a return address. But at the end of the article, it says, distributed 1968, Publishers Hall Syndicate, all rights reserved. These are the members of that commission. The chairman was Otto Kerner, who was the governor of Illinois. The vice chairperson was John B. Lindsay, mayor of New York City. All of these are high-powered people. Fred R. Harris, United States Senator from Oklahoma. Edward W. Brooke, United States Senator from Massachusetts, and a Black person. James G. Corman, United States Representative from California. William M. McCullough, United States Representative from the state of Ohio. I. W. Abel, President of the United Steelworkers of America. Charles R. Thornton, Chairman of the Board and Chief Executive Officer of Litton Industries, Inc. Roy Wilson, Executive Director of the NAACP. Catherine Graham Pedden, Commissioner of Commerce for the state of Kentucky. Herbert Jenkins, Chief of Police, Atlanta, Georgia. This is a letter I received from Dr. and MD John P. Spiegel, who is the director of the Lindbergh Center for the Study of Violence at Brandeis University in Waltham, Massachusetts. In my younger days, I dealt with academicians, scholars, professors, scientists, doctors, lawyers, liars, thieves, but I worked in that upper atmosphere because I always respected words, the power of words, and people became aware of that. So I was sought out by people, and this professor who was, well, actually he's the director of this center, wrote me this letter, September 7th, 1967, and he makes a reference which shows what I was doing in those days. Dear Ernie, when I returned from Europe last week, I saw your letter about the invitation to participate in the symposium at Northwestern University. I'm glad you've decided to attend as you have a lot to contribute to the students' thinking. I talked to universities throughout the country. Incidentally, I gave your name to the staff of the President's Commission on Civil Disorders when they asked me the other day who among the militants they should contact and how they should go about it. I hope they follow through and get in touch with you. Dave Ginsburg, the executive director, and Dick Palmieri, his assistant director, both struck me as naive. They've had no previous contact with the Black community and hardly know where to begin. They are under tremendous pressure from all kinds of hustlers, including researchers, who want to get into the act. We will collaborate with them as much as we can, given the limitations on our time, because they really need help and could so easily go off in all kinds of useless directions. The encouraging thing is that they do appear to want to do a good job and are fairly open-minded. Best wishes, John Spiegel, MD, Director. This is a telegram I got September 15th, 1967, from the General Counsel of the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders, otherwise known as the Riot Commission. Ernie W. Chambers. The National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders will hold hearings in Washington, D.C., and believes your testimony will be extremely helpful. I would appreciate it if you would let me know whether you will be available to appear before the commission on September 21st, 1967 at 9:30 a.m. Please do not hesitate to call me on Saturday, September 16th. My telephone number is, and he gives the address, Merle M. McCurdy, General Counsel. This was a telegram dated 3 days later, September 18th. This is to confirm your appearance on Thursday, September 21st at 9:15 a.m. as a witness before the Commission on Civil Disorders to be held in room 459, Executive Office Building, 17th and Pennsylvania Avenue, Northwest, Washington, D.C. Merle M. McCurdy, General Counsel, National Advisor. Now, remember, I was speaking in the Lion's Den. I was in Washington, D.C., where the CIA is found, the FBI, the president, all these big shots, and any number of police entities. This article was in the World Herald, September 20th. Ernest W. Chambers, an Omaha Negro with militant civil rights opinions, will be a witness Thursday in Washington at a closed session of the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders. The meeting, one of a series, will deal with grievances and tensions that lead to disorder in slum areas and also with the maintenance of law and order. Over a 3-day period beginning today, the commission has scheduled 17 witnesses. Mr. Chambers will appear Thursday morning, and he gives the time, with Peary Thomas, described as an authority on Spanish Harlem in New York City, and the Reverend James E. Groppe of Milwaukee. Father Groppe is the white Roman Catholic priest who has been leading open housing demonstrations in Milwaukee. Now, this is the letter written to me by the counsel for the commission after I had spoken. I'm giving it before I read my testimony to show the kind of correspondence that was going forth and the opinions people have. Dear Mr. Chambers, this is dated September 22nd. Your appearance before the commission last Thursday has provided us with an invaluable perspective on the problems we have been charged with studying. The thoughtfulness of your presentation has given us all a deeper insight into the magnitude of the problem we are facing. I hope you will write me if other ideas occur that we should consider, or if there are books we should read or persons we should consult. Then he hand wrote, I wish you the very best of good fortune and success. Not boasting, but here I was 30 years old. These people were impressed. They had never heard anybody speak the way in person, the way that I spoke. I didn't insist that my words be kept confidential, but nevertheless, he mentioned the impact that it had. And so did the chairperson, who said that they left as white as a sheet after I got through. This is dated October 3rd from the commission to an author. I and this author had a correspondence for several years, and her famous, most well-known book was Education of a Wasp. Her name was Lois Mark Stalvey. And this is what was written to her by David Ginsburg, who was the executive director of the Riot Commission. Dear Mrs. Stalvey, thanks for your note of September 29th. Ernie Chambers made a superb witness. We're grateful to him. We've already been in touch with your police commissioner, Rizzo. We tried hard to bring him here on the afternoon Chambers testified. It wasn't possible to get him. We're still trying. This is the police chief, notorious for the heavy-handed way he dealt with people, yet he didn't want to show up at the same hearing where I, a 30-year-old Black man, was going to speak. And yet there are people who are giving a false narrative now about what I am, what I did. And in those days, there were Black people in the community who thought that I was just blowing smoke. They would come to me if they needed help, but they weren't aware of the kind of people who were listening to me, taking seriously the things that I said. And this is the note that authoress Stalvey put on this copy of the letter that I just read. I'm writing Rizzo to suggest they show Buddy's film as an example of the conditions that cause disorders. I'll let you know what happens. This was a film a young Black filmmaker had put together about the plight of Black people. Now, this is the cover of Ebony magazine, and it's dated April 1968. And on the front, eloquent testimony of Nebraska barber at Riot Probe. Now, before I read this, I'm going to read some things about other people's reactions because this is somewhat lengthy, but these are comments, some of them from people who had access to my testimony after Ebony printed theirs. But there were two very powerhouse columnists named Drew Pearson and Jack Anderson in those days, and they got access to all of the testimony. And this article is dated the Washington Post, Tuesday, October 24th, 1967. The Washington Merry-Go-Round, the headline, Negro Firebrand tells Hill, meaning Capitol Hill, why. And this is what they wrote. I'm going to scamper right along. Because the greatest obstacle to racial peace is the communications barrier, it is vital to keep the lines open between the white majority and Negro minority. This advice came from one of the nation's most outspoken Negro firebrands, Ernie Chambers, a bearded, bushy-haired Omaha barber specializing in Afro cuts and civil rights agitation, who sounded off at a closed session of the President's Commission on Civil Disorders. This column has obtained a copy of his confidential advice, which is must reading for whites who are trying to understand how the Black militants feel and what they think. In a voice charged with emotion, they must have had more than just the printed word. In a voice charged with emotion, Chambers told the commission fiercely, quote, "We have marched, we have cried, we have prayed, we have voted, we have petitioned, we have been good little boys and girls. We have done every possible thing to make this white man recognize us as human beings, and he refuses." And they didn't print everything naturally, they selected things. You can understand why Jews who were burned by the Nazis hate Germans, but you cannot understand why Black people who have been systematically murdered by the government and its agents, by private citizens, by the police departments, you can't understand why they hate white people. A policeman is an object of contempt. A policeman is a paid and hired murderer, and you never find the policeman guilty of a crime, no matter what violence he commits against a Black person. In Detroit, you were shooting, quote, snipers, unquote. So you mounted a 50 caliber machine gun on a tank and shot into an apartment and killed a 4-year-old, quote, sniper. And that is a fact. Going on with his column, Father James Groppe, the militant little priest who has been leading Negroes in civil rights demonstrations in Milwaukee, had also come to testify. He nodded his vigorous agreement. "That's right," he said. Black people versus peace power. Chambers kept talking, quote, Black people doing ordinary, reasonable, peaceful things in this country are attacked by the police, and the police are praised for it. And you talk about giving the police more money and more power. You will appropriate all kinds of money to give the National Guard increased training in how to wipe us out. And it's a funny thing that in all these so-called riots, the police and National Guard kill far more people than the so-called rioters. And you believe that? And as for the sniping, don't you believe that? Why are no cops killed? I believe the National Guard should be fought like they are fighting us. We should fight, telling us we should fight in Vietnam. We are being forced by police misconduct to get together to fight the police. You know when I'll believe that singing "We Shall Overcome" is an effective way to fight the police? When I see you send your Marines, your airmen, and your infantrymen into Vietnam led by the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. We're going to fight your people like you fight us. And don't say I'm revealing too much, because if something happens to me, there are other people who will come up. They killed Malcolm X and produced Stokely Carmichael and Rap Brown. You kill Rap, he will multiply. You kill Stokely, he will multiply. Now you don't know me, so maybe you don't want to kill me. You might just want me in jail, but you get me off the scene and I'll multiply. Here's what you're going to give my child. I'm going to send him to school and teach him to respect authority. So here's a cracker teacher. Now get that word cracker, not the really bad nicknames for white people. So here is a cracker teacher standing in front of my child, making him listen to Little Black Sambo. See, that's the image the school gives him when he's young to teach him his place, a caricature wearing outlandish clothing. So he goes through the caricature like I did when I was a small child in grade school. And I don't forget these things. I wasn't born with the attitudes I have now. They were put in me by crackers. I sat through Little Black Sambo, and since I was the only black face in the room, I became Little Black Sambo. He gets a little older, so he can't be Little Black Sambo because he's too old for that. So you turn to good old Mark Twain, one of your great writers, and the black child grows from Little Black Sambo into Nigger Jim. And the white kids read this stuff and they laugh at the black child, and he's got to sit there and take it. They use the term nigger on the floor of Congress, and look at Senator Dodd, good old Christian Senator Dodd, and then old black Adam Clayton Powell. Dodd had more charges against him than you can shake a stick at, and in black and white from his own documents, what he had done. And you people sat around debating, quote, whether we're going to censure him or whether we're to reprimand him. Then there is Adam Clayton Powell, where the charges are very nebulous and uncertain. But the real problem is that he was a black man with too much power, and he was uppity, and he acted just like you have always acted. So you kick him out and say he is a bad man. That was the column they wrote about my appearance. Then the Lincoln Star in 1967, this is before I was in the legislature, wrote the following editorial. Drew Pearson's column, which appears regularly on this page, as well as on the pages of more than 625 other newspapers this week, treats a subject of critical importance. White America, writes Pearson, must be cognizant of all points of view on civil rights questions, and the line of communication between Negro and white America must be kept open and functioning. So he writes the column on Omaha, and Ernie Chambers is must reading for anyone who wants to try and understand how the militant mind views the Black man's place in society. It's must reading. Whether white America, or Omaha for that matter, chooses to concede anything to Ernest Chambers' impatience, solutions, or solutions is a separate story entirely. This is poorly copied. It's an old article, so I'm having a little trouble making out. But the fact remains that Ernest Chambers was one of 4 individuals from the entire United States invited to testify behind the closed doors of the President's Commission on Civil Disorders over the crisis facing America's cities. As such, Ernest Chambers' view becomes newsworthy regardless of whether one agrees with him or not. And I would add, likes him or not, or hates him or not. Continuing, Pearson has come into possession of Ernest Chambers' testimony and offers it for his readers' benefit. And if that helps to keep the line of communication open while the search for fitting solutions to the crisis of our cities goes on, Pearson's reporting shall have provided a distinct service to Omaha and to America as well. This article, December 2nd, 1967, from the New Pittsburgh Courier, Ernie Chambers, Portrait of a Black Militant by Ethel L. Payne, Washington, D.C. Ernie Chambers is a militant who speaks radical words that sear like acid over the body politic. Yet she calls me gentle by nature. The 30-year-old barber from Omaha, Nebraska is the leader of the militant Black group in that city. I'm not the leader of anything and anybody, but people who hear me speak draw their own conclusions. Continuing, he has had 2 years of law school and was expelled for his theories on Black power. He also has a wife and 2 children, and his whole motivation for activism is centered around the kind of future he wants for them, as well as all the disadvantaged groups in America. 2 summers ago, when Omaha, a city with about 40,000 Negroes out of a population of close to 500,000, exploded with Black fury, Ernie emerged as the leader around whom the angry youth rallied. He has been arrested, jailed, and constantly harassed. Lately, he has gained national attention because of his impassioned presentation to the Commission on Civil Disorders investigating riots in the cities. After columnist Drew Pearson ran a story on Ernie, the commission released an excerpt of his remarks, along with those of Peary Thomas, a Puerto Rican writer from Spanish Harlem, and Lerone Bennett, historian. Ernie's presentation contained some historical references to the revolt of the 13 colonies and a comparison of them to the present day struggle for freedom of the Black man in America. His words stung the listening commissioners. Some of them were quite uncomfortable, but he had a rationale which had to be respected. Quote, "You call what Rap Brown and Stokely Carmichael are doing treason and sedition, and you want to pass a law to keep them from telling the truth, just like Russia. Isn't that what they're doing with their anti-CRT nonsense?" But continuing, "Your ancestors brought us over on the good ship Jesus. You raped our women, you mutilated our men, you took away our dignity and our manhood, any vestige of a culture, religion, or language, you took all of that away from us. You have the mafia said, and I know this for a fact, it's been written about, it had at this time. You have the mafia setting up headquarters outside of Cicero, Illinois, where the Black people are not considered good enough to live, and taking out a charter of incorporation in Delaware, which in fact they did. And you don't bring tanks and machine guns against the mafia. The Justice Department leases some of its offices from the mafia. And you want to talk about respect for the law. Those were quotes from me. And I stood behind them and I said them in Washington, D.C., and nobody challenged me because everything I said was true. Chambers said that when the colonists attacked the British on Boston Common, they didn't just sing "We Shall Overcome" or ask the soldiers if they could sit and pray. They fought with anything they could get their hands on, and this is called patriotism, and monuments are erected to them, and they're considered heroes. Yet, he said, when Black people choose to fight for their rights and indeed their lives, machine guns and tanks are brought in. In Detroit, he said, they fired into an apartment house and killed a, quote, 4-year-old, quote, sniper, unquote, and the police are praised for this. Chambers gave a graphic description of inferior schools in Omaha, Black ghettos, and of teachers who inflict corporal punishment on pupils. He charged that the mayor who exploits Negroes living in slum property is favored by Secretary of Housing, Robert Weaver, because he supported legislation which Weaver wanted. I went after this man who was in the government while in his city of Washington, D.C., speaking to this riot commission. I don't play favorites. I don't have any fear. And what I have to say, I'll say it anywhere. Ernie's most dramatic words were, "We have marched, we have cried, we have prayed, we have voted, we have petitioned, we have gone out to Vietnam as doves and come back hawks. We have done every possible thing to make this white man recognize us as human beings, and he refuses." Last week, he spent 30 hours on the train to come to the conference on race and education that was in New York. A short man, slightly on the stocky side, wearing a t-shirt and khaki trousers, his beard and natural hairdo, worn Bush style, neatly framed his face with the gentle eyes. His angry words ripped through the room as he passionately defended the rights of Mexican Americans. That was an issue at that conference in New York. I'll read that again. His angry words ripped through the room as he passionately defended the rights of Mexican Americans. But being the kind of person he is, he apologized afterward to Mrs. Frankie Freeman, who was presiding. Ernie Chambers has great tenderness and respect for his soul sisters. In his soft voice, he told a young girl, weeping over police brutality to Negro school children in Philadelphia, "Little sister, don't despair. We're going to win." And to set the scene for that, we were at this convention, a great big room. I'd given the keynote address, and then they had some students who'd been invited, and she was one who was speaking, and she was overcome because she was talking about things that had happened to her classmates in Philadelphia. And there was a table in the front of the room with various dignitaries and important people and other big shots sitting up there. And she was standing like to my left to get the picture. And she had a microphone and she was talking. And when she began to cry, you could hear a pin drop, but nobody moved. And I was about midway back in that room, midway between the front and the back. And I waited and nobody did anything or said anything. So I made a show and I made a noise, scraping my chair back. And I walked up there and I was quite angry. And I put my arm around her shoulder and I just looked at the crowd. And the people at the table, I looked over at them. And that's when I told her what this lady quoted. About "Little sister, don't despair, we're going to win," and stayed with her until she dried her tears and retook her seat. This is something from 1969. It has nothing to do with that appearance, but it will show you the kind of person that I am. This article was written December 11th, 1969. Jury given no answers by Chambers. A federal grand jury session opened in Omaha Thursday with one of the first four witnesses, Ernest Chambers, refusing to answer questions. Chambers, an Omaha barber and Black activist, talked to reporters after he emerged from the eighth floor jury chamber. Grand jury sessions are secret. Chambers said he read the following statement 6 times in the jury room when questioned by U.S. District Attorney Richard Dyer. Quote, I respectfully decline to answer questions on the ground that I am not an attorney, and for all I know, the answer might in some manner tend to incriminate me, and I respectfully demand the right to be represented by counsel in these proceedings, unquote. Chambers said he read the statement when asked by Dyer about a liberation school established by the United Front Against Fascism. The reference was to the Vivian Strong Liberation School, named for the 14-year-old girl killed by a police bullet during a break-in investigation. There was no break-in. It was in a vacant project apartment, which the kids were allowed to have dances in. And the cops came, and when the kids ran, this one white cop pulled out his gun and shot Vivian Strong in the back of the head and killed her. He was charged with manslaughter and acquitted. The UFAF works in a coalition with the Black Panther Party at Kansas City. Chambers objected to the method in which grand juries are selected and called them star chamber proceedings. He said the United States government is against me. Chambers, 32, told reporters he was afraid of incrimination because he already faces a state charge, a felony of carrying a concealed weapon. This involves an incident last summer. Those charges were dismissed. Had I been convicted, I couldn't have been in the legislature. Chambers, after refusing to testify, was told by U.S. Assistant District Attorney William Tye not to leave the grand jury area, apparently in anticipation of a hearing before Chief Federal District Judge Richard E. Robinson, but it was delayed. Later, Dyer told Chambers he was free to leave, but that the judge had indicated it would be wise for him to consult a lawyer. Chambers said he has retained an attorney and went on. Then he started to lecture the U.S. attorney about making a mockery and a shambles of democracy. Dyer listened quietly for a moment and then told Chambers he was busy, had other duties, and left. Tye said that under federal procedures, a defendant who refuses to answer questions can be brought before a judge in open court. The judge then determines whether answers to the questions asked by the grand jury are self-incriminating. If not, the defendant can be directed to answer. If the defendant refuses, a contempt order can be issued. I wasn't there as a defendant. I was there as a witness. Dyer was asked if a person has the right to remain silent before a grand jury. Certainly, he replied, if on the grounds the answers might be self-incriminating. But how could a man incriminate himself by giving his name? That meant apparently Chambers had read his refusal to all questions, including one as to his name. And that made me think of a verse. It's from Matthew, the 17th chapter, the 8th verse. And when they had lifted up their eyes, they saw no man save Jesus only. I was there. Now I'm going to read from this testimony, and I'm going to read rapidly. My time is running out. On the cover of this ebony, it says, eloquent testimony of Nebraska barber at riot probe. And there was an editor's note. Perhaps few voices have so graphically described the embitterment of the nation's riot-torn Black ghettos as that of an Omaha, Nebraska barber, a 30-year-old militant Black man, married, 3 children, works every day, lives in a public housing project, who appeared before the President's Riot Commission and gave blazing testimony which surely helped shape conclusions contained in the commission's just released report, one of the most disturbing documents of our time. On these pages are excerpts of the testimony of that barber. And it was spoken without notes. Not one note did I have. Everything I said came out of my head. We have marched, we have cried, we have prayed. We have voted, we have petitioned, we have been good little boys and girls. We have gone out to Vietnam as doves and come back as hawks. That was a direct reference to Senator Brooke because he had gone to Vietnam to look things over and he was a dove, meaning he was against the war. Then when he came back, he now was for the war. We have done every possible thing to make this white man recognize us as human beings, and he refuses. He teaches us in school about the American Revolution. Do you know that those people who you teach me in school are patriots around Rhode Island burned a British frigate because it was too active in cutting off what they felt were their legitimate smuggling activities? 1771. The Gaspee was the name of the British ship. And do you know that those people in Virginia who you teach me were patriots did not condemn it? They praised this, quote, patriotic action, unquote, this blow struck for freedom. These names, these dates, all here, no notes. And I made eye contact with the commissioners all the time that I spoke. George III was the king. The 13 American colonies were British territories. They were extensions of the mother country, there for the purpose of Britain. A colony provides raw materials and then markets for the mother country. You all know what colonialism is. We know what it is, in fact, in America as Black people. You teach us that these colonies were not wrong when they spoke against the king. Let me get this. Oh, when they spoke against King George III, and when Patrick Henry came out specifically against him and compared him to Caesar with his Brutus, somebody said treason. And Patrick Henry said, if this be treason, make the most of it, unquote. Then I look at what you're trying to do to Rap Brown and Stokely Carmichael, calling it sedition and treason, and saying if there isn't a law against them, there should be. Then you want to turn around and tell the world that these men couldn't speak like this if they didn't have freedom of speech. If they lived in Russia, what would happen to them? Yet, what you are saying when you say a law should be passed against these men is that Russia, in fact, has the right idea, and you'd better catch up with Russia and pass a law against these men so they cannot tell the truth. Then there is a freedom school in Tennessee, which you want to say is teaching hatred because it tells Black people that your ancestors brought us over here on the good ship Jesus. You raped our women, you mutilated our men, you took away our dignity and our manhood. Any vestige of a culture, religion, or language, you took all away from us. You can understand why Jews who were burned by the Nazis hate Germans, but you can't understand why Black people who've been systematically murdered by the government and its agents, by private citizens, by police departments. You cannot understand why they hate white people. And you know what you want to do? And again, we are learning all this in school about how you reacted to the way people have done you, because in your background in history, you have a revolution of which you are very proud. You celebrate July 4th as Independence Day because you stood up against the British Empire and told them to go to hell. Your ancestors committed treason and you celebrate it now. And you were not treated nearly as badly as Black people are in this country. As Malcolm X said, we're catching more hell than Patrick Henry ever saw or thought of. Patrick Henry wouldn't have been able to take it. You can understand Patrick Henry and make a hero out of him, to me, in school. But then you're going to turn around and condemn us when we use peaceable methods, like Father Grappi and other individuals, to get the rights that your Constitution promised us. I didn't say being born or naturalized in this country was enough to make me a citizen. You said it. The Bill of Rights is yours. The civil rights bills are your bills. When the government itself violates the law, it brings the whole law into contempt. A policeman is an object of contempt. A policeman is a paid and hired murderer. And you never find the policeman guilty of a crime, no matter what violence he commits against a Black person. In Detroit, you were shooting snipers. So you mounted a 50 caliber machine gun on a tank and shot into an apartment and killed a 4-year-old sniper. Yet you have the mafia setting up headquarters outside of Cicero, Illinois, where the Black people are not good enough to live, and taking out a charter of incorporation in Delaware. And you don't bring tanks and machine guns against the mafia. The Justice Department leases some of its offices from the mafia. Nobody challenged anything I said. And you want to talk about respect for the law. In history, they teach me how great Teddy Roosevelt was. Yet when he wanted a certain canal built and he didn't have the authority based on the laws are constructed in this country, you know what Teddy Roosevelt said, who also said, no man is above the law. Damn the law, build the canal. They taught me that in a white school. And they taught me that Thomas Jefferson was a hero and a patriot because he wrote all men are created equal. And Thomas Jefferson was a slaveholder. And you want to teach my child that the man who would have enslaved him, had he been alive in those days, is a hero to him? And that's what they still want to teach in the schools. Patrick Henry, who talked about freedom being so great that he would rather take death than enslavement, was a slaveholder himself. Then George Washington, the president, first in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen, he was a slaveholder. And you want to teach my child that these are great men. Then Abraham Lincoln, one of the most pious hypocrites of all time, and you can read from his own words where he said he had doubts whether Black men were as well endowed as white people. Here's the only thing he would grant the Black man: the right to eat the food that his hands produced. He was against slavery morally, but he said, since he was the president, officially, there was nothing he could do except what would benefit the Union. And his wanting to do what benefited the Union prevented him from carrying out what he many times stated felt was his moral responsibility. Then you want to tell me about morality operating in this country, the last stronghold of freedom, the free world, the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your hungry, those yearning to be free, and a Black man who fought in every conflict that this country ever had. This country ever had. The first blood spilled from the body of Crispus Attucks during the American Revolution. Now I want to draw a parallel between what happened at the so-called Boston Massacre on Boston Common and what we do now. I was given a time signal. I want to draw that parallel. Here was Captain Preston with a detachment of British soldiers, and they had a right to be there because this was a colony. But the colonists felt oppressed because Boston was being occupied by a, quote, foreign force, unquote. So some of the citizens got together. They didn't just sing, "We shall overcome." They didn't ask the soldiers, "Can we sit down here and pray to our God?" They got slabs of stone and snowballs and clubs and attacked the soldiers. When the soldiers fired into the crowd and killed 7 people, the Americans called it a massacre. And they say that was a great patriotic action by those people. Yet the first one to fall was Crispus Attucks. And there is, by the way, a statue to him in Boston. Yet Black people doing ordinary, reasonable, peaceful things in this country are attacked by the police, and the police are praised for it. And you talk about giving the police more money and more power. Look, since I can't finish this, and it should all be given at one time, I'm going to read my presentation at another time. And you'll hear some of this again that I read, and I may comment along the way. I was scurrying in the hopes that I could get it all done before my time ran out, but I guess more time was taken with the preliminaries early on than I had realized. So I'm just going to kind of ad lib for the rest of the time that I have today. I talk about these people, white people, who are opposed to what they call critical race theory. It talks about how this country was built on racism, which it was, and slavery, which it was. There are four specific references to slavery in the US Constitution. So if they don't want anything said about slavery, they need to do away with their Constitution. But these ignorant white people don't have to know anything. Look at the simple-minded people running for governor. They don't know history. They don't know about this discussion of white fragility. White people are so fragile, and white people have written about it, that they fall apart when the truth of racism is presented. They are racist. They know the racist sentiments they have. They don't want Black people living in the same neighborhood they live in. They don't want Black children going to school where their white children go to school. And when Black people do, they're treated unfairly. When some Black girls playing with the Lincoln High School basketball team went to Grand Island, racial slurs were shouted at them from the stands. White adults were there, white referee, white teachers, and others, and these white kids felt comfortable shouting racial slurs that everybody could hear. So you know what is going on out there, and we know what's going on everywhere. And the white people, if they're any listening to this, know what's going on. When I was in the legislature, I constantly hit them with these things, and they could never counteract what I said. First of all, they don't know enough. They don't read. They don't study history. They don't know history. But white people don't have to. There's a standard that non-white people are forced to reach that white people don't have to reach. A white man doesn't have to have a college education to get a job. And if a Black man has a college education, let him get a job in keeping with his or Black woman experience and education. But no, 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 that's not how it will go. There have been numerous Black people, especially women, who get jobs at a beginning level, and yet they learn all aspects of the job. Then they are given the task of informing white people what the job is about, so that the white people can be given a supervisory position over the Black person who taught that white person how to do the job, but the Black person is not good enough to get the job. I've lived in this world a long time. I've experienced things. I was in the military. People want to tell me people fight for our freedom in the military. Well, that may be so, but the military was segregated. And it was formally segregated by requirement until Harry Truman desegregated it in 1948. And still there was racism and segregation practiced. There are men who are very old now who discuss what happened to them during the Second World War and the segregation and discrimination. When they were guarding Italian and German prisoners of war in this country, and they went through the South, the Italians and the Nazis, the Italians, you know, Mussolini, the fascists, they were allowed to go into these white restaurants and eat. The Black guards wearing military uniforms of the United States of America with the flag and all of it were made to stay outside. And one of them was talking to public radio, and he said a white cop came up to him and called him a Black SOB and said, if you set foot in that restaurant, I'll blow your MF and brains out. That's a white American cop talking to a Black man in American uniform with the flags and his ribbons, guarding prisoners of war from countries who tried to destroy everything America stands for, but they were the embodiment of what America stands for: racism, discrimination, cowardice. I may bring an article, if I remember it, where the Attorney General wanted to set up metal detectors out at the entrances to the Capitol because they were afraid of gunsels coming in and maybe blowing everybody away. They wanted to put up bulletproof glass at ends of the corridor, both ends where the Attorney General's office was located. And guess who fought that and kept it from happening? I did. And an article was written pointing out that I objected to that happening in the Capitol, that it should be open and accessible to all people without them being patted down or searched or made to pass through a metal detector. And then they pointed out how many threats that I get all the time on notes tacked to my door, notes slid under my door, prank phone calls, yet I'm the one who is unafraid and said, you're not going to make a fortress out of this Capitol building. And it's a Capitol building where white people are, where white people come, and they were afraid of their own people. It's difficult for a Black man not to go crazy and shoot up as many white people as he can before they kill him, but he wouldn't be crazy. He would be behaving in the way that white people have always behaved. You kill my dog, I'll kill your cat. You hit me, I'll shoot you. But with him lynching us, raping our women, cops blowing us away, we're not supposed to defend ourselves. I don't believe in violence when everybody is nonviolent. But if you come against me with violence, there'll be something waiting for you. And I intend from time to time to discuss what really was going on in the city of Omaha during the 60s, because there are false narratives. One of them is that a group called the Lynx invited Malcolm X here. They wouldn't have come within 20 feet of Malcolm X. The 4CL, of which Dan Goodwin and I were members, and we walked with them on their demonstrations so that no white people, because they thought these people were nonviolent, would attack them. So there were always at least 8 of us who accompanied them and made it clear that you're not going to put your hands on these people. So we met with Malcolm in the day when he came. Some of us talked to him and he invited us back that night, and we returned that night and had a very good discussion. The Lynx and no other group had anything to do with Malcolm X coming here. The 4CL did it. The 4 ministers, if I can remember their names, Kelsey Jones, Rudolph McNair, General R. Woods, and R.F. Jenkins. They were the 4 figureheads. And that's the way it was in those days. And now, as I always end, saying what the canary said when he was told that the cage door was open, I'm out of here.
Thank you for watching The Ernie Chambers Show. If you'd like to make suggestions, email us at ewcfacts@gmail.com. That's ewcfacts@gmail.com. This has been an EWC Communication production.